On the vast political chessboard of the ancient Mediterranean, two giants were preparing for a clash that seemed inevitable. On one side was the rising power of Rome, which, after defeating Carthage in the Punic Wars, had transformed from a regional power in Italy into a state with Mediterranean ambitions. On the other side was the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III the Great, heir to one of the largest portions of Alexander the Great's empire, stretching from Asia Minor to the borders of India. Both shared a common goal: control over Greece and Asia Minor, territories that were not only strategically valuable but also carried immense cultural and economic significance. For the Romans, Greece represented the key to securing their dominance in the east and protecting Italy from future rivals. For Antiochus, ruling Greece meant consolidating his prestige as the great Hellenistic monarch and projecting his power westward. This clash was not merely a military conflict, it was a war of strategic visions, imperial ambitions, and radically different styles of power. At its core, it was a question of who would shape the course of the Mediterranean, the young Roman Republic with its discipline and pragmatism, or the old Hellenistic lineage still dreaming of reviving the glory of Alexander. The Roman-Syrian War, also known as the Aetolian War, would become the stage where these ambitions collided in a struggle that would not only transform Greece and Asia Minor but also define Rome's expansion to the east and the decline of the Hellenistic world. By the late 3rd century BCE, Rome had ceased to be merely an Italian power. After decades of constant warfare against neighboring enemies, Etruscans, Samnites, and Gauls, the Republic had unified the Italian peninsula under its control. However, it was during the Punic Wars against Carthage that Rome made the decisive leap from regional power to Mediterranean power. The confrontation with Carthage had been brutal and transformative. During the Second Punic War, Rome teetered on the brink of destruction when Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps with a multicultural army and his legendary war elephants. Defeats at Trebia, Trasimene, and especially Cannae, where tens of thousands of Romans fell in a single day, marked some of the darkest moments in the Republic's history. Yet Rome had something that even Hannibal's genius could not break: an indomitable will and an unmatched capacity to recover from defeat. While other Hellenistic city-states might have surrendered after such disasters, Rome recruited new legions, perfected its tactics, and, under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Africanus, brought the war to the heart of Africa. The victory at Zama, 202 BCE, not only ended Carthage as a rival but established Rome as the undisputed power of the western Mediterranean. After Carthage's fall, Rome turned its eyes eastward. Greece and Asia Minor represented not only a strategic frontier but also a region steeped in cultural prestige. Rome viewed Greece as a land to protect from Hellenistic kings like Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus III. Thus, the Romans began to justify their eastern campaigns not merely as a matter of security but as a mission to liberate Greek cities from foreign domination. In reality, this policy masked a clear ambition to become the arbiters of the Mediterranean, extending their influence ever farther. The defeat of Macedonia at the Battle of Cynocephaly, 197 BCE, had already demonstrated the superiority of the Roman legion over the Macedonian phalanx. Now, the next challenge would be to face the Seleucid Empire, a rival larger and more ambitious than Philip of Macedon. Rome, strengthened, pragmatic, and with an army tested in the harshest wars, was ready for the next step in its expansion: direct confrontation with Antiochus III. While Rome extended its shadow eastward, another giant ruled vast regions of the ancient Hellenistic world, the Seleucid Empire, founded after Alexander the Great's death by Seleucus I Nicator. At its height, the empire stretched from the borders of India to Asia Minor, encompassing Mesopotamia, Syria, and much of the Levant. The throne was held by Antiochus III, called the Great. His reign, beginning in 223 BCE, was marked by a series of military campaigns aimed at restoring the glory of the Seleucids, who had suffered fragmentation and territorial losses in previous decades. Ambitious and energetic, Antiochus sought not only to defend his domains but also to reconstruct Alexander's legacy. One of his first major victories came during the Fifth Syrian War against the Ptolemies of Egypt, where he seized the strategic region of Coele Syria. This triumph not only strengthened his position against a Hellenistic rival but also secured a vital communication point between Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean. Unsatisfied, Antiochus launched campaigns in Asia Minor, consolidating his control over coastal cities once under Ptolemaic rule. These actions began to alarm cities like Smyrna and Lampsacus, which saw Rome as a potential ally against the growing Seleucid power. But Antiochus did not stop there. His imperial vision led him to cross the Hellespont in 196 BCE, establishing a presence in Thrace and openly challenging Roman influence in Greece. It was a bold, almost provocative move that set off alarms in the Roman Senate. Antiochus' ambition was further reinforced by an unexpected recruit, the arrival of Hannibal Barca at his court in Ephesus. After Carthage's defeat, the legendary general became a living symbol of resistance against Rome. Having him as a military advisor gave Antiochus not only prestige but also hope of leveraging Hannibal's strategic genius in a war against the Romans. However, Antiochus' grandeur concealed vulnerabilities. His vast empire was a mosaic of cultures, languages, and traditions, difficult to keep united. And although his army was large, supported by the formidable Hellenistic phalanx and dozens of war elephants, it faced a very different enemy, the Roman legion, a flexible and pragmatic military machine that had already proven superior to the Macedonian phalanx at Cynocephaly. Thus, while Rome advanced as a disciplined and rising power, Antiochus stood as the last great Hellenistic monarch willing to oppose them. His ambitions would inevitably bring him into conflict with the Republic, a struggle that would define the future of both East and West in the Mediterranean. If there was one place where Rome and Antiochus were destined to clash, it was Greece. A land of ancient city-states, the cradle of philosophy and Hellenic culture, yet at this time also a mosaic of leagues, independent cities, and kingdoms striving to survive amid the imperial ambitions of Rome and the Hellenistic kings. After Macedonia's defeat in the Second Macedonian War and Rome's triumph at Cynocephaly, 197 BC, Rome proclaimed at the Isthmian Games in Corinth that the Greeks would be free. However, this freedom soon revealed its true nature. Greece was now under Rome's influence, which intervened in its disputes and acted as the supreme arbiter. This situation generated discontent. Some leagues, such as the Aetolian League, began to feel betrayed. They had been allies of Rome against Macedonia, but they soon discovered that Rome behaved more like a new master than a liberator. This resentment became an opportunity for Antiochus III. The Aetolians, seeking to regain prestige and autonomy, invited Antiochus to Greece. They promised him military and political support if he presented himself as the defender of Greek freedom against Roman dominance. For Antiochus, it was the perfect opportunity. Not only could he appear as a new Alexander, protector of the Greek cities, but he could also directly challenge Rome's growing hegemony. In 192 BC, Antiochus landed in Greece with an army and was welcomed by the Aetolians as a savior. He soon captured strategic cities, such as Demetrius in Thessaly, and established alliances with several poleis that viewed Rome as an overly heavy yoke. His presence ignited the conflict that would go down in history as the Roman-Syrian War or the Aetolian War. Rome quickly reacted. It mobilized its forces, secured the loyalty of crucial allies such as the Achaean League, and, surprisingly, even gained the support of a former enemy, Philip V of Macedonia, who preferred siding with Rome rather than risking losing everything to Antiochus. The war was set. It was no longer a local matter among Greek leagues but a direct confrontation between two superpowers. On one side, Rome and its Greek and Macedonian allies, on the other, Antiochus and the Aetolian League. A clash that would decide not only the fate of Greece but also the future of the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus III's landing in Greece had been welcomed with enthusiasm by the Aetolian League and some sectors dissatisfied with Rome. However, very soon his campaign began to show signs of weakness. The Seleucid king had arrived with barely 10,000 men and 500 cavalry, a respectable force, but insufficient to face the Roman war machine and the armies of its Greek and Macedonian allies. Rome responded decisively. In 191 BC, the Senate sent an army under the command of Consul Manius Acilius Glabrio, reinforced by Macedonian troops from Philip V and contingents from the Achaeans. The Romans not only outnumbered Antiochus, but they also had a far more disciplined military structure and a network of reliable allies. Aware that he could not face them in open battle, Antiochus decided to entrench himself in a place full of symbolism, the pass of Thermopylae. Centuries earlier, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had resisted the vast Persian army of Xerxes there. Antiochus hoped to emulate that feat, trusting that the narrow terrain would compensate for his numerical inferiority. The plan, in theory, was not bad. Antiochus fortified the pass, deployed troops in strategic positions, and counted on Aetolian support to guard the approaches. However, he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated Rome's ability to use the same strategy the Persians had employed against the Spartans. While the Seleucid king resisted the legion's frontal attack, a Roman contingent, guided by locals familiar with the terrain, managed to flank the Aetolian positions through the mountains. The result was disastrous. Surprised and attacked from the rear, the Aetolians fled in disarray, leaving Antiochus's flank exposed. The Roman legions took advantage of the confusion, overran the defenses, and forced the Seleucid king to retreat. The Battle of Thermopylae in April 191 BC was not only a military defeat, it was also a devastating moral blow for Antiochus. The image of the liberator of Greece crumbled. The Greeks who had welcomed him as a savior began to lose confidence in him, while Rome consolidated its prestige as guarantor of order in the region. After the defeat, Antiochus was forced to abandon Greece and retreat to Asia Minor. From that moment on, the war would no longer be a struggle for Greece but for control of the Aegean and Asia Minor, territories vital for the future of the Seleucid Empire. Following the defeat at Thermopylae, Antiochus III withdrew to Asia Minor, hoping to reorganize his forces and halt the inevitable Roman offensive. However, he soon realized that resisting on land alone would not be enough. True control of the war would be decided in the Aegean Sea, the artery connecting Greece, Asia Minor, and the strategic islands of the eastern Mediterranean. To sustain his cause, Antiochus needed to keep open the sea route supplying his army and, above all, prevent Rome from joining its fleet with those of its powerful allies, Rhodes and Pergamon, both traditional rivals of Seleucid power. Confident that he could still dominate the sea, Antiochus reinforced his fleet at the port of Ephesus and put one of the era's most brilliant strategists in command, Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian genius who had shaken Rome during the Second Punic War. His naval experience, however, was limited. Hannibal had been a master of land warfare but never a seasoned admiral. Antiochus's hopes quickly collapsed. In 191 BC, at the Battle of Cynossema, the Seleucid fleet suffered a severe blow at the hands of the Rhodians and Pergamines. The experienced sailors of Rhodes, famed for their skill and speed, outmatched the heavy Seleucid ships, demonstrating that control of the Aegean was tilting toward Rome. The disaster was repeated the following year. In 190 BC, Hannibal was defeated at the Battle of Eurymedon, where his fleet was virtually annihilated by the Rhodians. The situation worsened further with the Battle of Myonnesus, where the combined fleet of Rome and Rhodes decisively crushed the Seleucids. The consequence was clear: the Aegean Sea fell under absolute Roman control, and Antiochus lost the ability to move troops, protect the coasts of Asia Minor, or maintain garrisons in Greece. The sea, which should have been a bridge for Seleucid expansion, became a wall isolating him from his allies. This strategic loss marked a turning point in the war. Without a fleet, Antiochus was reduced to a land-based defense in Asia Minor. Rome, on the other hand, could move troops and supplies freely, setting the stage for the decisive confrontation, the Battle of Magnesia. With naval supremacy in the hands of Rome and its allies, Antiochus III was forced to concentrate on the territory of Asia Minor to face the imminent threat. However, despite his efforts to reorganize his forces and reinforce his positions, the strategic situation was unfavorable. The lack of a powerful fleet and the growing pressure from the Roman legions forced the Seleucid king to make critical decisions. Antiochus chose Magnesia ad Sipylum, an ancient city that, while historically significant for the Seleucids, also offered a location where his army could hope to withstand the Roman advance. Antiochus trusted that the terrain would be sufficient to counter the approaching Roman forces, led by Lucius Cornelius Scipio, a commander known for his skill in warfare and ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Antiochus III strategy. Aware of the difficulties, Antiochus decided to fortify his army and prepare a defense that leveraged his numerical advantage. While Rome had gathered about 30,000 soldiers, the Seleucid army was much larger, with estimates ranging from 50,000 to 72,000 men. This numerical superiority encouraged Antiochus to rely on a frontal attack, dividing his army into three main sections. The left wing, commanded by Seleucus, included 22,200 soldiers, consisting of light and heavy infantry, archers, slingers, and cavalry, along with a significant number of war elephants. The center, commanded by Philip of Macedonia, consisted of a solid line of Macedonian phalanxes, with 16,000 heavy infantry, supported by 3,000 additional units and 20 elephants. This formation was the core of his army and the centerpiece of the strategy. The right wing, directly led by Antiochus III, included 24,700 men, including cataphracts, royal guards, archers, light infantry, and 16 reserve elephants. Antiochus trusted that this division of forces would allow him to contain the Roman assault and wear down their lines, while his war elephants, a key component of his army, could break Roman formations and wreak havoc on the infantry. The Roman strategy. On the other side, the Romans under Lucius Cornelius Scipio knew they faced a much larger army. However, Rome's experience in difficult battles gave them a significant advantage. The Roman tactic, represented by the manipular legion, was flexible and adaptive. The Roman legions were not organized in a rigid line like the Macedonian phalanxes. Instead, each legion was divided into smaller, mobile units called maniples, capable of reacting quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Scipio also had a notable advantage in cavalry. With about 6,000 horsemen, the Roman cavalry was prepared to flank the Seleucid army, harassing its lines and attacking its flanks, weakening the phalanxes' resistance and opening gaps for the infantry to advance. To counter the threat of the elephants, the Romans deployed their own African elephants in strategic positions, although their number was significantly smaller than the Seleucid elephants, only 16 compared to Antiochus' 54. Roman superiority in maneuverability and the agility of their units was their main strength. The battlefield terrain. The terrain where the battle would take place was crucial to the final outcome. Magnesia was located about 15 kilometers northeast of Sardis and offered relatively open ground, but also some strategic points where Roman forces could use their flexibility to deploy in dispersed formations. Antiochus, like other commanders of his time, trusted that the terrain would give him an advantage, allowing his heavier forces, such as elephants and phalanxes, to crush Roman lines. However, what Antiochus could not fully anticipate was the Romans' ability to adapt to the terrain and execute rapid maneuvers to counter the attacks. The anticipation of battle created a tense atmosphere for both armies, with the pressure of a decisive conflict that would determine control of the eastern Mediterranean and the future of the Seleucid Empire. Defeat would not only mean the fall of Antiochus III but also the beginning of Roman expansion into Asia Minor and ultimately into the heart of the Seleucid Empire. On December 17, 190 BC, the fate of the Seleucid kingdom and the future of the Roman Republic were decided on the plains near Magnesia ad Sipylum. With an army of about 30,000 soldiers, Rome faced a coalition of over 50,000 Seleucid fighters, led by Antiochus III. The battle would be a crucial confrontation that determined Roman supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean and marked the end of Seleucid expansion westward. The battle began with a series of attrition maneuvers on the terrain, with both armies carefully positioning themselves. Antiochus III, confident in his numerical superiority and heavier formation, kept his forces in a massive frontal deployment, with the center dominated by the Macedonian phalanx, the centerpiece of his strategy. The phalanxes, formed by rows of soldiers armed with long spears, sarissas, were designed to create an impenetrable line that would cut off any enemy advance. On their part, the Romans, led by Lucius Cornelius Scipio, adopted a more flexible strategy, taking advantage of their famous manipular formation. This formation, which consisted of smaller, more mobile units, maniples, allowed the Roman legions to quickly adapt to enemy movements and exploit any weaknesses in more rigid formations, such as the phalanx. One of the first key phases of the battle was the confrontation with the war elephants, which represented one of the main threats of the Seleucid army. Antiochus had deployed 54 elephants, using them in an attempt to break the Roman lines and sow chaos in their ranks. However, the Romans, well trained to fight these beasts, devised an effective tactic. They opened gaps in their lines to allow the elephants to pass through without causing significant damage. The use of light cavalry and Roman archers helped to scatter the elephants, causing some to go out of control and inflict more damage on the Seleucid ranks than on the Romans. The Roman strategy proved more effective than Antiochus had anticipated, and many of the war elephants began to flee the battlefield, demoralizing the Seleucid troops. As the elephants dispersed, Scipio ordered a concentrated attack on the left flank of the Seleucid army, commanded by Seleucus. The Romans, with their cavalry and infantry units, attacked fiercely, using their maneuverability to exploit weaknesses in Antiochus' formation. The Roman cavalry, supported by Pergamene allies, advanced quickly, striking at the light infantry and slingers forming the left wing of the Seleucid army. Within hours, Antiochus' left flank began to collapse. Seleucus' forces, unable to withstand the Roman push, were driven back, leaving the central phalanx exposed to attacks from the Roman flanks, allowing the legionaries to strike directly at the heart of the Seleucid army. Meanwhile, in the center of the battle, Antiochus' phalanx, despite its enormous size and discipline, began to falter. The Romans, with their ability to adapt to the terrain and aggressive tactics, began to break the ranks of the Seleucid soldiers. The war elephants assigned to protect the phalanx were also scattered, causing even more confusion within Antiochus' ranks. The flexibility of the Roman formation proved more effective than the rigid structure of the phalanx, which could not withstand attacks from multiple directions. Concentrating their forces, the Romans began to press the center of the phalanx, weakening the cohesion and discipline of the Seleucid army. Antiochus, who had relied on his central formation to win the battle, saw his army quickly disintegrate as the infantry units became disorganized and collapsed. Aware of the gravity of the situation, Antiochus tried to turn the battle in his favor by launching a heavy cavalry charge on the right flank, which he personally led. In this final offensive, the Seleucid king used his cataphracts, the heaviest and most experienced cavalry in his army, along with his royal guard in an attempt to break the Roman lines. However, the Roman cavalry, though numerically inferior, was well trained and prepared for such maneuvers. Despite Antiochus' efforts, the Roman forces on the right flank held, and the allied cavalry from Pergamum helped to halt the charge. At the same time, the Romans in the center seized the opportunity to envelop Antiochus' forces, attacking from multiple fronts. Antiochus III's situation became desperate. His exhausted and demoralized army began to retreat. The Battle of Magnesia ended in a crushing victory for Rome. Although Roman losses were significant, approximately 5,000 soldiers, the defeat of the Seleucid army was even more devastating, with an estimated 10,000 casualties among the Seleucid forces. Antiochus III, seeing his army crumble, withdrew with the remainder of his forces to Edessa, seeking to save what remained of his empire. The Roman victory at Magnesia marked the end of Antiochus III's ambitions to expand his empire into the western Mediterranean. The Treaty of Apamea, signed in 188 BC, imposed harsh conditions on the Seleucid kingdom, which was forced to cede large territories to Rome, pay a massive indemnity, and drastically reduce its military power. Rome, in turn, consolidated its control over Asia Minor and secured its dominance in the region, laying the groundwork for future expansions in the east. The victory was also a milestone in Rome's rise as the main power in the eastern Mediterranean, a crucial step toward total hegemony over the Hellenistic world. After the decisive defeat at Magnesia, Antiochus III was forced to retreat and seek a diplomatic solution with Rome to avoid the complete destruction of his empire. In 188 BC, after a long period of negotiations, the Treaty of Apamea was signed, imposing a series of humiliating conditions on the Seleucid kingdom. The treaty, which ended the war, was severely punitive for Antiochus III and his empire. The main conditions were as follows. Territorial cession. The Seleucid kingdom had to give up large portions of its territories in Asia Minor to Rome and its allies, including Pergamum, which gained a significant portion of the region. Additionally, it had to renounce its holdings in Syria and Phoenicia, strategic areas controlling trade and maritime routes in the eastern Mediterranean. Reduction of the army. Antiochus III not only lost territories but also had his army drastically reduced. The Seleucid Empire was prohibited from maintaining more than 10,000 infantry soldiers and was forbidden to have a war fleet, meaning it could no longer project power into the Mediterranean. Economic indemnity. Rome imposed a massive indemnity of 15,000 talents, an astronomical sum at the time, to be paid over 12 years, severely weakening the Seleucid economy, already precarious after the war. Withdrawal of Seleucid forces in the west. The treaty required Antiochus III to withdraw his forces from Asia Minor, the Aegean, and any other territories under Roman or Allied control. This not only reduced the empire's power but also left Rome as the dominant regional power. Submission of Rome's allied cities. The treaty also guaranteed the independence of Greek city-states that had aligned with Rome during the war, such as Ephesus, Smyrna, and Athens, further consolidating Roman influence in Greece. The terms of the treaty marked the irreversible decline of the Seleucid Empire. Although Antiochus III returned to Asia alive, his empire was severely weakened and could no longer compete with the rising Roman power. Eastern tribes, such as the Parthians, exploited this weakness, while in the west, Greek cities began to demand greater autonomy. This marked the beginning of the end of the Hellenistic era and Rome's firm advance toward control of the eastern Mediterranean. Additionally, Antiochus III had to deal with internal problems. Popular discontent over the economic burdens imposed by the treaty grew, and difficulties in meeting the terms of the indemnity led to revolts and challenges to his rule. Antiochus III died in 187 BC during a conflict with Parthian forces, without having restored the greatness of his empire. Rome's victory at the Battle of Magnesia and the subsequent treaty marked a new era in Mediterranean history. The Treaty of Apamea not only consolidated Antiochus III's defeat but also allowed Rome to expand its influence in Asia Minor, paving the way for future eastern conquests. Rome, having already established hegemony in the western Mediterranean, now dominated the east. The victory solidified its power over Greece and Asia Minor, where it already had key allies such as Pergamon and Rhodes. With the collapse of the Seleucid Empire, Rome emerged as the dominant force throughout the region. The treaty also had cultural and social consequences. As Rome increased its influence, Greek cities began to accept the Roman presence with less resistance, and some, like Athens, even came to see Rome as a natural protector against other powers. Cultural assimilation between the ancient Greek civilizations and the rising Roman power became a long-term phenomenon, with Roman culture adopting many Greek influences that would endure for centuries. The Treaty of Apamea also laid the groundwork for a new power relationship in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome had not only gained a territorial victory but also secured strategic superiority in the region. However, the fall of the Seleucids was not the final chapter in conflicts between Rome and the Hellenistic powers. Rome's future in Asia Minor and Greece was marked by new tensions, which would later erupt into conflicts such as the Macedonian Wars and the Syrian War, further consolidating Roman control over the region. Following the victory at Magnesia and the Treaty of Apamea, Rome established itself as the primary power in the Mediterranean world, particularly in the east, where the defeat of the Seleucid Empire opened the way for expansion and the reorganization of power balances. The fall of the Seleucids marked a turning point not only for the Hellenistic lands but also for Rome's relationships with the Greek city-states and Asia Minor. This section examines how Rome became the new dominant force in the region, altering the entire power dynamic of the eastern Mediterranean. Although Rome had defeated Antiochus III and expelled the Seleucid Empire from Asia Minor, the challenge of managing relations with the Greek city-states remained. Despite Rome's victory, Greek cities did not immediately become part of the Roman Empire. Instead of directly annexing Greece, Rome adopted a protectorate strategy, establishing alliances with major city-states and Greek leagues. Rome became the protector of the Greek cities, presenting itself as a check against the ambitions of other rivals, such as the Kingdom of Macedonia. This policy of alliances was key for Rome's expansion, as it not only strengthened relations with the Greek cities but also prevented potential internal conflicts at a time when it had not yet fully consolidated power in the region. However, this strategy was not without tensions. While Rome presented itself as a benevolent power, Greek cities felt their autonomy was being limited. Many viewed Roman interventions as a form of control disguised as protection. For example, the Achaean League, a confederation of Greek cities, began showing signs of discontent with Rome's growing influence. Rome, for its part, complied with certain demands but also established a system of direct oversight over the internal politics of several cities. After the collapse of the Seleucid Empire, Rome turned its attention westward, where the ambitions of the Macedonian monarch still posed a potential threat to its interests in Greece. In 197 BC, Rome defeated Philip V of Macedonia at the Battle of Cynocephaly. This triumph represented the final defeat of Macedonia as an independent power in the region and marked the beginning of a period of Roman hegemony in Greece. Rome not only guaranteed the independence of the Greek cities but also placed Macedonia under Roman tutelage, establishing a Roman protectorate instead of annexing it directly. This victory was key, as it consolidated Rome as the guarantor of peace in the region while also increasing its influence over Greek institutions. As Rome expanded control over the eastern regions, the Greek cities began a process of cultural assimilation under the growing influence of Rome. However, Roman expansion did not stop there. In Asia Minor, Rome continued its process of incorporating territories. After the fall of the Seleucids, the Kingdom of Pergamon became a key ally of Rome, ensuring stability in Asia Minor. The Treaty of Apamea made it clear that Rome would be the new power in the area, and the alliance with Pergamon laid the foundations for future Roman expansion eastward. Internal conflicts and resistance from Greek cities. Despite the alliances and protection Rome offered to many Greek cities, distrust toward Roman dominance never fully disappeared. Several city-states, such as Sparta and Corinth, rebelled against the restrictions imposed by Rome, although their attempts at resistance were quickly suppressed. In many cases, Greek cities sought to restore the autonomy they had lost under growing Roman influence. An example of rising internal tension occurred in Athens, where a group of democratic leaders rebelled against Roman control, seeking to restore their independence. Although Rome imposed sanctions and punishments, it also allowed many Greek cities to maintain their political systems, always under Roman supervision. After the victory in the Roman Seleucid War, Rome began consolidating its control over Asia Minor. Coastal cities like Ephesus and Smyrna became Roman allies or client states, allowing the Roman Republic to control the major ports and trade routes of the East. As Rome established itself in Asia Minor, it also gained political and economic control of this wealthy region. Through strategic alliances and political influence, Rome expanded its borders, incorporating a region that would soon become a crucial part of its empire. This eastern expansion also had a significant cultural impact. As Rome advanced, Greek and Hellenistic influences began to merge with Roman culture, creating what would be known as the Hellenistic Roman world. In 188 BC, after the disastrous defeat suffered by the Seleucid Empire at the Battle of Magnesia, the Treaty of Apamea was signed, officially ending the Roman-Seleucid War. This treaty was one of Rome's most significant victories and marked a point of no return in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Treaty of Apamea not only represented the military defeat of Antiochus III and the collapse of the Seleucid Empire, but it also reshaped the geopolitical order in the region. Under the harsh conditions of the treaty, Antiochus III was forced to cede all territories west of the Taurus Mountains, which included Asia Minor, Syria, and much of the Aegean coast. Additionally, Antiochus III had to pay an enormous indemnity of 15,000 talents over a period of 12 years, plunging his already weakened empire into a severe economic crisis. Restrictions were also placed on the Seleucid naval fleet, limiting it to only 10 ships, which reduced their capacity to project power across the Mediterranean Sea. As part of the agreement, Rome consolidated its power in Asia Minor, securing the independence of its allied cities and extending its influence throughout the region. Cities such as Pergamum, which had been allied with Rome, received part of the territories ceded by the Seleucids, while other areas of the Asian coast came under Rome's indirect control. This treaty marked the beginning of Roman expansion eastward, laying the foundations for the later dominance of the region over the following centuries. The treaty also marked the end of the Seleucid Empire as a major power in the ancient world. Although small kingdoms continued to exist in the region, they never regained their former strength and cohesion. Rome, for its part, leveraged this victory to establish undisputed hegemony in the eastern Mediterranean and continued advancing toward the conquest of Greece and other key territories. The Roman-Seleucid War and the Treaty of Apamea marked the end of a crucial period in the history of the eastern Mediterranean. With the defeat of the Seleucid Empire and Roman expansion, Rome not only consolidated its dominance over the region but also redefined the power dynamics in a world where the Roman Empire was emerging as the central force in ancient history. This war, although often overshadowed by other conflicts such as the Punic Wars, played a key role in Rome's expansion and the transformation of the Mediterranean world toward the era of Roman domination.